Hello there, this is James S. Crofty, 1978, and Cowboy Bebop, the entirely forgettable and pathetically mediocre adventures of the second worst bounty hunter in the solar system, the most arse-achingly tedious, pretentious, and intelligence-insulting pile of garbage that I can ever remember watching all the way through to the end, and quite possibly the worst example of writer's arrogance that I've ever seen in my life. A series which left me asking, how in the name of the great holy donkey can this have ratings of 9 and 8.9 out of 10? How can it be so famous and popular that when I type cowboy into Google, literally the first suggestion before cowboy boots or cowboy hat is Cowboy Bebop? And how can anyone, let alone most critics, cite this as, quote, a masterpiece or one of the greatest animes of all time? After all, the plot section of the Wikipedia article linked to Narrative Underbar lays out the so-called main story arc of the series far better than the anime itself, which rushed to cram it into a handful of episodes while filling the rest with superfluous and incidental bullshit. And reading about how each of the main characters supposedly represented an aspect of the creator's personality, I actually laughed out loud because each one is an unrelatable and one-dimensional walking cliché who left no impression upon me whatsoever, except for Ed, whose quirky absurdity was apparently supposed to make her adorable, but which instead, by episode 18, made me want to put on a pair of hobnail boots and keep on kicking until the twitching stopped. So when, in one episode, the main protagonist Spike meets the only bounty hunter in the solar system who is even worse than he is, they instantly despise one another, and the explanation for that mutual hatred is that their personalities are too similar, I actually yelled at the screen, "What? Spike has a personality?" And addressing what it is that makes Spike a bad bounty hunter, including the fact that in that particular episode, both he and his rival let the bomber who they were supposed to be chasing get away because they were too busy having a macho fight to see who was better on the roof of the building that he'd just blown up, only for the other guy to declare Spike the winner and give up being a bounty hunter because they'd reached the end of the episode and needed to get rid of him somehow. After wondering for the first 10 episodes or so how Spike could legitimately call himself a bounty hunter at all, when I believe that we only ever saw him collect one bounty during that whole time, I eventually came to realise that, like calling Lara Croft an archaeologist, it was merely a contrivance explaining why he was there when stuff happened, because the crew of the Bebop go somewhere and stuff happens, the end, is an adequate summary of almost every episode. To be honest then, the entire crew of the Bebop could have been wiped out in a crash or other disaster, and my only thought would have been, damn, Faye was sexy, but oh well, it's not like she's the only sexy female character in anime. Cough. Because expanding upon my opening point about writers' arrogance, the anime's fundamental failure is that it never takes the time to establish anything, either with regards to the characters, the individual standalone stories, or what is laughably called the main story arc. For those of you who don't know, writer's arrogance is the term which I and others use to describe the problem of writers, directors, and other creators failing to explain or establish something because they know it inside out. After all, they are the creators. Duh. But the problem is that we're not. We don't have a clue, and therefore, unless they explain it to us or give us enough to piece it together ourselves, then the creator has failed to communicate the story. Just as a brief disclaimer though, before fans of this series or anyone else who chooses to strawman what I've just said declares that ahaha, so you want the creator to hold your hand and spoon-feed you exposition because you're too stupid and or lazy to figure it out for yourself, anyone who knows my taste in movies in particular understands that these are the last things that I need, that I am the one who almost always comprehends everything on the first viewing, then explains it to those to whom it seems seems confusing or unclear for any reason, and who rolls his eyes at series such as Star Trek The Next Generation and even Deep Space Nine for spelling everything out so patronisingly at the end of each episode. So then, it must be noted that weaving exposition into a narrative is a delicate art form, giving the audience enough to comprehend what's happening and to relate to the characters and their struggles, while holding enough back to maintain intrigue and avoid front-loading the story. But as a game played yesterday on my good friend Astrovex's channel demonstrated, as always the link is listed down as the underbar and I ask everyone to please subscribe to him, there's an important distinction between holding back key points regarding the story, the characters and so forth in order to maintain intrigue, and not telling us enough, developing the characters enough, or engaging with us enough to enable us to give a flying fig about what's going on at all. It's what killed the Star Wars prequels and ruined Doctor Who while Stephen Moffat was showrunner, even more than it had already been ruined while Russell T Davies was in charge, and as far as I can tell, on top of the fact that it's only 26 episodes long, writers' arrogance is also what destroyed Cowboy Hip-Hop, because having assumed while I was watching it that the anime was the worst possible adaptation of a manga, struggling to cram entire story arcs into each episode and therefore reducing them to a Cliff Note summary, only to learn while reading the Wikipedia article linked below that this was the original version, the story that the creator wanted to tell, and that the critics still hail it as a masterpiece. The bare bones of a truly engaging and expansive fictional universe to rival Babylon 5 are all in here, with, as I suggested a moment ago, the storylines of each individual episode being enough to fill multiple episodes, or in some cases, even entire seasons, and in spite of what I said earlier, even the characters had the potential to be excellent if only we'd had the time and the opportunity to learn who they are and why we should give a flying fig about any of them, except of course for Ed, because I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. But for the series to make a massive deal of the fact that Faye has no memory from before she was frozen, but then refused to pay off her character arc at all in any way, shape, form or fashion, for her still to be obsessing over her debt to the hospital when it was apparently established in a previous episode that it was all a massive scam on the part of the doctor, the nurse and the fake lawyer. But once again though, there was no real conclusion to that episode, so we have no clue if she did still owe a debt to the hospital or not. For the crew of the Bebop to acquire a data dog worth millions, but always to think that it's an ordinary Welsh corgi, and except for a couple of instances when it's hinted at and used as an unnecessary plot contrivance, the fact that it's a data dog to never come up again. For it to be established from the beginning that Ed was a master hacker and joined the Bebop, only for her to be an annoyance, and the plot contrivance who got the bounty hunters the information that they needed to finish the episode, find their targets, and then in one episode near the end, for her to learn out of the blue that, oh, by the way, your father who abandoned you is now looking for you, for Ed to meet him, but for him to then run off because he's obsessed with his work, and for Ed to then leave the Bebop to look for him and never be heard from again. As a former writer myself, while I was watching the series, I came up with 17 ways to connect and pay off these and other storylines, and although each of them was a cliched pile of tripe because I pulled them out of my arse with no thought or effort of any kind, that just goes to show what a monumental feat it was to not wrap up any of them in any way, shape, form or fashion. For it to be established in unbelievably cryptic hints and flashbacks that Julia was the love of Spike's life and that their quest to be reunited is the backbone of the story, only for us to, spoiler alert, only meet her in the final two-parter just before she's killed, simply to pave the way for the shortest, lamest and most insulting final showdown with the villain fight scene in the history of anime, a villain who was only slightly better established than the love interest in the previous episodes, but who died before we had a chance to really know anything about him as well. However, that's the fate of almost every character in Cowboy Reggae, particularly in the standalone episodes, i.e. almost all of them, because they are introduced as part of an unbelievably rushed story which is wrapped up with all of the satisfaction and closure of simply sticking a piece of ribbon onto someone's birthday present and then physically hurling it at them out of the window, in which they're either killed or it doesn't matter anyway because we never see or hear from them again. For example, the unstoppable laughing assassin who soaks up bullets as if they were moisturiser and is revealed in flashbacks to have been the victim of illegal experiments by Section 13, such an original name, to create a perfect assassin which destroyed his mind, reducing him both mentally and emotionally to a child, but effectively gave him superpowers at the same time, and who now has a crippling phobia of cats because a cat was always watching while he was being conditioned. So what does all of this mean? Nothing. And what impact will it have upon the episode? Not at all, because during their battle to the death in Not Disneyland, because they don't want Disney to sue them, Spike throws a dagger that hits the assassin in the leg, he falls to the ground crying for his mummy, and is crushed by a giant animatronic Not Pluto. The end. But how does this revelation about Section 13's illegal experiments to create a perfect assassin affect the rest of the series? Haven't you been paying attention? It eventually got to the point at which at the beginning of every episode I was yelling, why are you even bothering to introduce new characters when they'll be dead or gone in 20 minutes anyway? And indeed, before watching Cowboy Drum and Bass, I saw this summary of one episode by JelloApocalypse.
I got hit by a magic meteor. Now I'm 10 years old forever. Ha ha ha!
So, look what I got. Anti-magic science bullet!
Turns Hocus Pocus into fuck you, you're dead!
Oh, come on! Fuck you, old man!
Fuck you too, kiddo.
Once again, the link to the video is listed down as the underbar, but having assumed at the time that it was a piss take, because how could that possibly describe the entire episode, looking back on what I remember of the episode myself, that is honestly the only summary that I could give as well. Because how does the fact that at least one person was made immortal by a meteorite that struck the Earth affect the rest of the series? I think we've already established that nothing in this anime has any impact upon anything else within it, and at the end of the day, in fact, the one word that sums up Cowboy Rhythm and Blues is meaningless, because for all of the Wikipedia page's claims that it's an exploration of philosophical issues, it is nothing of the kind, since with no intellectual or emotional weight, investment or impact, because nothing is established, and there is no time to pause and reflect, because the episode is rushing to fit everything in, like a drug dealer trying to flush 50 kilos of heroin down the toilet during a police raid. Just like the characters and everything else within the series, any philosophical message or musings in a given episode simply fade into the white noise as soon as it's over of what just happened, who were those people, and why the fuck should I give a shit? So in conclusion then, if you want standalone allegorical episodes which each explore a different philosophical and or social issue, then I recommend Kino's Journey, in spite of the fact that aside from episode 2, they were all cliched and banal. And if you want an actual story which explores issues and raises important social, moral and ethical questions in a way that actually establishes them properly along with the characters, the world and everything else, then even the Trigun anime is better than cowboy progressive folk rock in that respect. But if you want to waste your time and be insulted by the self-congratulatory masturbation of an auteur who is nowhere near as intelligent as he believes himself to be, but who makes up for that by being so pretentious that he includes the line, "The work which has become a genre unto itself shall be called Cowboy Bebop," in the title screens before and after the commercial break in some episodes, then knock yourself out. Please. Literally, with a brick or some other suitable heavy object, so that I don't have to read in the comments about how I've missed the entire point and I'm too blinkered or prejudiced to understand this anime's profound genius and genuine glory.